Hi, it's Don McLaughlin from Falcon Discovery here at Legal Tech 2014 in New York, and I'm pleased to introduce Bill Dimm from Clustify. Bill, great to have you.
Nice to be here.
Bill, if you'd just give us a thumbnail of your background individually, personally, and then sort of the background to Clustify, that'd be great.
Sure. I have a PhD in theoretical physics from Cornell back in the 90s. Then I went to work for a bank doing derivative securities research for 4 years, really applied math. And then at the height of the internet bubble, I decided to launch a tech company. We launched a website called magportal.com, which is a search engine and directory for finding online magazine articles. And several years later, a law firm contacted me. They had seen some technology on our website, and they called up and said, we've spent the last 2 years looking for software that can cluster tens of millions of documents and nobody can do it. And we saw this similar articles technology that you have, and that was the inspiration for building our Clustify product.
Fantastic. So at its core, Clustify is really about essentially clustering, and is it search engine optimization? What more precisely about clustering did you guys nail that you feel like wasn't being addressed in the market based on what the law firm was describing to you?
Yeah, so Clustify does conceptual clustering, near duplicate detection, and predictive coding. Predictive coding is relatively new. The idea with the clustering back in 2008 when we launched the product was to group related documents together so that when attorneys are doing a review, looking for responsive documents for the case or privileged documents, they have all related documents grouped together so they can go through them much more efficiently and produce a more consistent result.
Terrific. So looking back at the past year, and perhaps even spanning back to 2008 at the inception of Clustify, are there trends that you feel as though they're no longer trends? They're solidifying, they're more mainstream. Anything that you've observed along those lines?
Well, volumes of data have grown enormously over that time, and the problems that existed back in 2008 have only gotten larger, and document review has become very expensive because of that. I think now the predictive coding is really catching on. I think that's definitely here to stay. It's become much more accepted. There's a lot more understanding in the field, and I think that's going to stick around.
Terrific. So looking ahead to 2014, what challenges do you see or hear from corporations, from law firms, lawyers, folks in the industry, challenges they continue to face and you think they're going to continue to grapple with?
Well, in talking to some of our existing clients about the issues they saw with predictive coding, of course, there's things like defensibility that everybody talks about. Another thing that they talked to me about was workflow. They looked at various products on the market, and they found that the workflow tends to be very rigid, and it didn't really integrate well with their typical way of doing document review. They were forced to do batches of a certain size, and nothing can move forward until things get done, and that didn't really mesh well with the way review works on a day-to-day basis. So I think a really important theme going forward, and one that we've tried to address in our software, is to make the software work for the reviewer instead of trying to force the reviewer to work for the software.
Interesting. Well, in order to do that, you need to know how people work. And so how have you gotten close to the way in which lawyers and support staff work? What's been the best source of information related to workflow?
Well, we really just talk to the clients a lot. We've paid a lot of attention to things going on in the industry, like the debates between random sampling and judgmental sampling, and just recognize that while mathematically maybe random sampling is nice, for practical reasons you need to be able to just adapt to whatever the user can give you. If the prevalence of relevant documents is very small in the data set, then random sampling isn't really practical, and you have to let people use search engines and things of that sort and take whatever they can give you to help train the system.
Got it. And how have you developed the flexibility within your tool at a high level to address that need for end users who are dealing with sets of data that at times they don't have much choice in selecting?
Right, so what we do is we just give them a lot of flexibility in how they work with the system. So you can do random sampling, you can type in keywords to do searches. If you find a document that's important for the case, you can pull up documents that are similar to that one and review them right away. So that if you find an interesting thread, you can really jump into that and you're not constrained by the system at what you look at. Also, our software does real-time predictive coding, meaning that it updates its predictions every time you review a document immediately. So you see the impact of every single document. If a document causes something funny to happen, you see that right away. If you tag the document in a way that the system thinks is wrong, it can warn you about that right away. So while it's fresh in your mind, you can think about whether or not you made a mistake, maybe you overlooked something in the document.
Interesting. And are you finding clients that increasingly want to leverage predictive coding for things other than just review, in the traditional sense of using predictive coding to train software and then code all the documents? And if so, what do you see clients either asking for or they're currently using?
Well, the biggest interest seems to be in just cutting the cost of the review. So they want to be able to use predictive coding to review a subset of the documents instead of all of them. We have had some conversations with people about potentially moving the predictive coding piece into corporations, getting handle on their data internally before it gets to the point of actually having litigation and having to deal with it. So there may be some movement in that direction because corporations are the ones that ultimately benefit from the cost savings that come from doing it.
Absolutely. Do you find that there is any lingering resistance or concern by any group in particular in using the predictive coding elements of Clustify?
Well, they're of course always concerned about defensibility and making sure that there isn't too much missed or a smoking gun being missing, things of that sort. And of course we do our best to address that. At the end of the day, if you don't look at every single document, then you can't guarantee that something's not missing. You can just say, we're 95% confident that we got this percentage of documents. We can do testing to demonstrate that. But at the end of the day, it's a tool and it can only do so much. It doesn't do magic.
Agreed. But do you see more interest in one area versus another in terms of actual legal practice, or just across the board in litigation?
It's really been across the board in litigation from what we've seen.
And push from law firms or corporate clients, or both with your software?
It really varies. Corporations have an interest because obviously they benefit economically. Law firms, we've had some interest from people who really feel that they need to be able to offer this kind of thing to their clients because it gives them a competitive advantage over other law firms that potentially can't handle the case in an inexpensive way.
Bill, if you describe in particular, how the software is dynamically updating decisions made by reviewers during the course of the predictive coding exercise.
Sure. We refer to it as real-time predictive coding, and the idea is that every time you review a document, it's going to update all of the predictions immediately. So with the old way of doing things, you work in batches. Maybe you get 100 documents, you send them to the reviewers. They don't know what's happening with those documents until they come back and go through the system, and then if there's a problem, you don't know which document caused the problem. Whereas real time, you see the impact of every single document as you do the review. So for example, the system can point out to you, well, this document, it looks like you tagged it as not responsive when other things were responsive. Maybe it's wrong. So you can correct that while it's still fresh in your mind. Or maybe the document is tagged correctly, but it's having a strange impact on the system, and at least you know that that problem is there, and you can decide what to do about it.
Got it. So there's the ability for users to see those deviations, if you will, on the fly as the review is progressing.
That's right. If you have a control set to monitor how the review is progressing, how the learning is progressing, you will see the documents in the control set shift and the sorting order change every time you review a document, a training document. You'll also see the precision recall curve update as well. So if you see a bunch of documents shift towards the top of the list because suddenly they're thought to be responsive and you know that they're not, then you realize that something funny happened with that training document.
Interesting. And while we were off camera, you mentioned a recent effort that a law firm reached out to you concerning a privilege review. That'd be very, very interesting for you to recap for our viewers.
So the firm in this case had identified 130,000 potentially privileged documents based on some keyword searches. But then when they started actually doing a review on them, they found that only 5.3% of those documents were really privileged. And so they wanted an efficient way to go through those documents. They didn't want to have to review all of them. And so they trained Classify with the documents that they had already reviewed and found that it could find 90% of those privileged documents by reviewing just 10,000 documents. So they really didn't need to spend time reviewing even a large fraction of that data set.
And is that an instance where your involvement in highlighting the way in which they could use the software you think really benefited the firm?
Yeah, I do. They had various ideas about how to approach this problem, and I was able to put out a different option that they were able to test out very quickly. And if it hadn't worked, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But in this case, it worked really well for them.
And presumably, the end client was satisfied.
I'm sure they are. I haven't heard from them directly, but I would imagine they are.
Terrific. Well, thanks again, Bill.
Nice to talk to you.